America is unique in that it's a nation that was dedicated to a proposition. If you think about the American founding, Lincoln dates the founding not to the signing of the Constitution, but to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And that's really what gives America its DNA and its lifeblood. And the founders said that we were dedicating a nation to a proposition that we hold certain truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among those rights were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we've seen in the past 50 years that all three of those self-evident truths of natural, God-given rights have been challenged in ways that the founders could have never expected. And so I'll just take them right in order. It was 41 years ago that the natural right to life was challenged by the US Supreme Court in their Roe v. Wade decision. And properly understood, the right to life isn't something that is just for the strong or the powerful or the rich or the healthy, but it's for all human beings. The weak, the marginalized, the infirm, and the unborn. And throughout most of American history, that right was protected in law. It wasn't a legislative decision that changed the right to life in America. It was a judicial decision. It was the activist decision by the Supreme Court, unelected judges, who discovered somewhere in the Constitution a right to privacy that entailed a right to kill unborn children. And if you think about that, none of the founders anticipated a ruling like that, that what they were doing in establishing our nation was protecting a right for women to kill unborn babies. And so that's one way to think about this, is that the government was saying, the founders were saying that government has to be limited. And to have government limited, there must be something that limits government. And what is it that limits government? It's our natural rights. And so government exists to protect our rights. It doesn't exist to violate our rights. And that this was the proposition that was lying behind America. And it was true not just for Americans, but it was true for all people. And that's one way in which America was really a beacon to the rest of the world. It was that all human beings possessed these rights. So that's a little bit about the right to life. And we'll discuss more during the Q&A. But let me move to the next truth that the Declaration talks about. It talks about the right to liberty. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And now I think many Tea Party groups have focused rightly on economic liberty. The importance of markets, the importance of free markets, the importance of free trade, the importance of not having government meddling with you and your business, not having government meddling with your economic activities. But liberty takes on a particular importance when it's dealing with the most important things in life. Liberty has an increased importance when it's dealing with the most sacred things in life. And that's why religious liberty is the first right protected in the First Amendment to our Constitution. The founders understood that the most important type of liberty that Americans should enjoy is the liberty of their conscience, the liberty of their faith, the liberty to exercise their religion without government interference. If you think in the American context, we had European settlers who were leaving Europe partly because of wars of religion, established churches, government interference with their ability to lead their faith how they saw fit. And they come to America and they establish that there won't be an established church and that Congress will make no law interfering the free exercise of religion, infringing upon the free exercise of religion. And for the first 150, almost 200 years of America, we don't really have problems with this. And now, in recent times, we see major conflicts. And I'll just mention two. You can see in the Obamacare HHS mandate, the government thinks that it can force Christian-run businesses, or actually all businesses, into paying for certain drugs and devices that can cause abortions. And so the two famous cases that are before the Supreme Court right now, pending decisions, are the case involving Hobby Lobby and the case involving Conestoga Wood. Hobby Lobby is owned by the Green family. The Greens are evangelical Christians. Conestoga Wood is owned by the Hahn family. The Hahns are Mennonite Christians. And neither family has any objection to contraception in and of itself, but they do have objection to pills that can kill. And of the 20 mandated drugs and devices under the HHS mandate, 4 of them can cause abortions. 4 of them have an FDA label that says this drug, this device may terminate a pregnancy. And the Hans and the Greens say, we will not have the government force us to pay for medications that can kill. And they're saying that, we have religious liberty concerns here. We also just have the interest that all Americans should have in not violating someone else's right to life. The Obama administration, unfortunately, has argued that religious liberty should be redefined to be freedom of worship. So whereas the founders protected the free exercise of religion, the founders understood that you had to take your faith into the marketplace, into the public square, that religious liberty wasn't just for Sunday morning, religious liberty was for Monday through Saturday as well. The Obama administration is redefining religious liberty as freedom of worship and saying it's really just for inside the 4 walls of your chapel or your church on Sunday morning. It's piety restricted to the chapel. We'll see what the Supreme Court decides. Earlier this week, we got a good decision from the court in the case involving the town of Greece and legislative prayer. It was a 5-4 decision upholding the authority of the town of Greece to open its legislative sessions with a prayer. We'll see what the Supreme Court says about whether or not Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood can run their businesses in accordance with their values. Contrary to what President Obama might say, they did build those companies. He'll say they didn't build that, but the Green family started out creating this arts and crafts store from nothing. This is something that they built over the years. They now employ several thousand employees. The starting wage that their employees earn, the least paid wage earner at Hobby Lobby makes twice the federally mandated minimum wage. So they offer a generous compensation package, and they offer health care that's really a gold package. It's a wonderful health care plan, but they don't want to include these 4 drugs. If they continue to offer this health care plan, but not these 4 drugs, they have to pay a fine of $100 per employee per day. When you add this up, it becomes millions of dollars in fines. If, however, they just decide to stop offering health care to their employees, they pay a $2,000 fine per employee, but per year. So it's an 18 times higher penalty if they provide health insurance, but not the 4 pills that can kill, than it is if they just stop providing health insurance altogether. That makes no sense, unless you're trying to incentivize people to stop offering health insurance in the private market and move on to the government-run exchanges. So that's liberty, in particular religious liberty. Let me say a concluding word about the pursuit of happiness. Normally, government protects the right to pursue happiness by leaving consenting adults alone. The government doesn't have to run your life or micromanage your affairs. You're left free to pursue your happiness by not having the government on your back. And this works really well for autonomous, self-sufficient adults. But I would venture a guess that most of the people, in fact, probably all of the people in this room, did not enter life as a self-sufficient, autonomous adult. Most of us entered life as an entirely helpless, entirely needy child. And on average, you would need about 18 years of love and care and attention to then become a law-abiding, productive member of society. I think they've now upped that age. I think you can be up to 25 or 26 and stay on your parents' health insurance. But historically, it's been around 18, 20 years that children needed adult guidance. So how does the state protect the right to pursue happiness for children? It's by incentivizing a man and a woman to commit to each other permanently and exclusively as husband and wife, to then be mother and father to any children that their union might produce. Government's not in the marriage business because it cares about my love life or your love life, because government's a sucker for romance. If marriage was just about consenting adult romance, we could get the state out of the marriage business. We could get the state out of the bedroom. The reason the government's in the marriage business is that the union of a man and a woman can produce a new life, and that new life deserves a mother and a father. What happens when that doesn't occur, what happens when the family breaks down, is that that's when we have the increase in crime. That's when we have the increase in child poverty. That's when we have the decrease in social mobility. That's when we have the increase in government welfare spending. So everything you could care about, if you care about limited government and you care about social justice, if you care about the poor and you care about freedom, is better served by healthy families, a healthy marriage culture, than it is by a government that misdefines, undefines marriage, and then tries to pick up the pieces through a government-run welfare program or a government-run school program or a government-run police program. And now, at one point in American history, virtually every child was born and raised by their married mother and father. So 50 years ago, the statistics on births to single mothers, they're all in the single digits. Today, 40% of all Americans, 50% of Hispanics, and over 70% of African Americans are born to single mothers. And now, these children have done nothing wrong, and frequently the mothers have done. Statistics again? Sure. It's 40% of all Americans, 50% of Hispanics, and over 70% of African Americans. And these kids haven't done anything wrong, but they're going to have a much steeper hill to climb in life. Frequently, the mothers haven't done anything wrong either. It's the father who's abandoned the mother. It's the father who's abandoned the child. So how will we insist that fathers are essential when the law has redefined marriage to make fathers optional? Because the message that redefining marriage to make it a genderless institution sends is that men and women are interchangeable, and that two fathers or two mothers is the same thing as a mother and a father. What redefining marriage does is it makes marriage about adult romance, it makes marriage about adult desire, rather than about the needs and the rights of children. It re-centers the marital relationship away from what's the best family type for children, and it puts it back into adult romance. And the consequence of this is what we're already been experiencing for the past 40 years. This is more or less a continuation of the sexual revolution. It's a continuation of all of the changes that we've seen within the family and within sexuality ever since the 60s. It's not as if same-sex marriage caused these problems. It's that same-sex marriage is the logical conclusion of the hookup culture and the divorce culture and out-of-wedlock pregnancy and extramarital affairs and all of the rest. It's only after you have all of those bad steps that you get this final bad step. And so the question for us is, do we want to take that last step, put the final nail in the coffin of a proper understanding of marriage and family, or do we want to reform and go back to a healthier understanding of family, where every child is given the gift of being raised by their married mom and dad, where every child can then experience the mobility that that brings, the increased social mobility, the decreased poverty. If you're raised by your married mom and dad, you have a much better chance of graduating high school, of getting a good job, of going to college, of never spending a night in jail, of never receiving any government welfare money. And yet what we're doing is we're only further deteriorating a sound understanding of marriage. So let me say one word in conclusion, and then we can open it for Q&A. And that's to say that we've been here before. I mentioned at the very beginning that it was 41 years ago that the Supreme Court manufactured a right to abortion. It's nowhere in the Constitution. You can read the Constitution as closely as possible, and you'll never actually discover a right to abortion within the actual document. And that's one of the great things about the Tea Party, is that it wants to go back to the actual text and history of our founding documents. It would have been easy for pro-lifers 40 years ago to say, well, we lost. The media was telling pro-lifers that they were on the wrong side of history. The media was telling pro-lifers that, look, all of the children are pro-choice. You know, you're on the wrong side of demographics. The next generation disagrees with you. And then the cultural elites, the media elites, the academic elites, and the political elites were all evolving on this issue. That's perfect, thank you. They were evolving on this issue so that you had people like Ted Kennedy and Jesse Jackson and Al Gore and Bill Clinton, all of whom had at one point been pro-life. They evolved to become pro-choice. And at the worst, public opinion was about 66, 67% in favor of abortion, 33 against it. So 2/3 pro-choice and only 1/3 pro-life. But 40 years ago, the pro-life movement didn't quit. They didn't say, oh, we're on the wrong side of history. What they said was that we're on the right side of truth. And that what matters is bearing witness to that first truth that the Declaration speaks about, the truth that we're created equal and that we have a right to life. And so now, 41 years later, my generation is more pro-life than my parents' generation. And that's largely because of the work of your generation. It's because of the work that your generation did in making the case for life, whether it was the scientific case or the philosophical case or the legal case, whether it was creating the pro-life institutions, National Right to Life, Feminists for Life, Students for Life, Collegians for Life, Americans United for Life. You can go down a list. The Susan B. Anthony list, the crisis pregnancy centers. In various ways, in law, in politics, in academia, and in culture, pro-lifers bore witness to this truth, and now it's bearing fruit. In the past several years, more pro-life laws at the state level have been passed than in the previous several decades combined. Wendy Davis is famous for her filibuster in Texas, but that law passed, and it was then upheld by a panel of 3 female judges on the Fifth Circuit Court as good law. And so now in Texas, you have to make up your mind at 20 weeks. And so whereas a decade ago we were passing bans on partial birth abortion, the type of procedure that Kermit Gosnell was doing in his facility in Philadelphia, now we're doing bans at the 20-week stage, and we'll keep backing it up until we'll eventually get to the point where every child is welcomed in life and protected in law. But it's taken 40 years to only get to the 20-week period. And now the same thing needs to take place on religious liberty. The same thing needs to take place on the marriage question. So whatever the courts may do on the marriage issue, I think the pro-marriage movement takes its lesson from the pro-life movement on what you do in the face of an unconstitutional declaration that the Constitution says something that it doesn't. What do you do in response? You keep bearing witness to the truths of the Declaration, and you do that work. So with that, I'll stop and we can open it to questions.
How does the gay lobby have so much power when there are so few gay people?
That's a great question, and I mean it's one that I wish I understood better what the answer is, because it would give us a leg up in responding. I think part of it is our own fault. The reason I say some of the fault lies on us is that we haven't done a good enough job of making the case for marriage. And if our liberal friends can't understand why it is that we defend marriage as the union of a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, a mother and a father, part of the blame should lie on our own shoulders for not being out there making the case. And here there's a helpful distinction with the pro-life movement. Most liberals who are personally pro-choice say things like this: I disagree with the pro-lifer, but I understand why she's pro-life. I can understand why someone who is pro-life has the concern that they do have for the unborn child. And then they can go the next step and say, well, and therefore I'm not gonna force that person to violate his or her conscience. I'm not gonna force the pro-life nurse to participate in an abortion, because even though I'm personally not pro-life, I can understand why she is. So I think we have to get to the point where they can say, look, I'm in favor of same-sex marriage, but I understand why you're not in favor of it, and I won't force you to violate your conscience as a result. Other questions? Yep, right in the corner.
Did I hear you say that your generation is more pro-choice?
Pro-life, pro-life. Yes. So my generation is more pro-life than my parents' generation.
I can't believe that. I work in a pregnancy center here, and I'm not seeing much of it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's when Gallup and the other polling companies, names escape me right now, when they do their annual public opinion polling, more people in my generation will report being pro-life than in previous generations. And it could be that it's more socially acceptable to be pro-life in my generation than it was 30 or 40 years ago, that the feminist movement was so strong and ideologically uniform that you had to be pro-choice in order. I mean, this is where you get the people say, oh, she's not a real woman because she's pro-life. Or where you have someone like Nancy Pelosi and Barbara Boxer who claim to speak for all women. It's now a position where there are prominent pro-life women who I think have given a permission slip to women everywhere to be publicly pro-life. The Susan B. Anthony list and groups like this who champion the fact that the original feminists were pro-life. They saw abortion as something that harms women. You know, it's not just about harming the unborn child, it's also about harming women. And they saw it as a way that you can have men victimizing women and children. You have the term now bro-choice. You know, it's an easy way for a guy to be pro-choice because he more or less gets consequence-free sex. He doesn't have to man up and be a father or a husband. And I also think the ultrasound has helped with this. It's now very difficult to make an argument that the unborn child is a clump of cells. Science has definitively proved that that's not the case. The unborn child is a child. Each and every one of us were once a child in a womb. And at this point, to say, oh, you're imposing your theology on me, or, oh, that's just what the Bible says. No, faith and reason go hand in hand on this issue. There's no conflict between the Bible and science. There's no conflict between philosophy and theology. They all point to the same truth. And I think my generation is seeing that in a way that previous generations didn't see it because there were so many lies that were being told. I mean, it's amazing to see how the founder of NARAL Pro-Choice, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, converts to the pro-life movement later in life because he saw abortion for exactly what it was. He presided over several thousand abortions, and then eventually he's like, I can't do this any longer. His conscience was eating at him. Yep.
There's a section of Obamacare where the single women now want to be able to have assisted.
Yeah. So there's in addition to the contraception mandate in Obamacare, there's also a provision that allows states to list certain other services as essential services. And the state of California in particular has said that conception services, reproductive technologies for couples who are infertile. And the way that California has done this is that they've said that anyone after a year of trying who can't conceive has to be eligible under all of the state health care plans in the state of California for reproductive treatments. And this includes same-sex couples. So that after a year of trying, if the same-sex couple can't conceive a child, they can then be eligible for the artificial reproductive technologies. And I think there are several reasons. Yeah. Because California has same-sex marriage, I mean, that's part of it. But the reason to be concerned is that one is that we know that artificial reproductive technologies involve egg retrieval. So someone has to, let's say it's a same-sex male couple, someone's going to be the egg donor, and someone's going to be the surrogate womb for that couple to have a child. And we know that that'll involve hyperstimulating a woman's ovary, retrieving lots of ova, fertilizing lots of ova, and then only implanting some of them. The rest of those embryos are then frozen indefinitely. We then also know that when you do this for the same-sex couple, you're creating a child with the intention of depriving that child of either a mother or a father. If it's the lesbian couple using a sperm donor, that child will be raised with two mothers but no father. If it's the gay couple using an egg donor and a surrogate womb, that child will be raised without a mother. And it seems that it's one thing to say that an orphan child might be adopted by a gay or a lesbian couple because that's better than being orphaned. It's another thing to say we should create children with the intention that from the very beginning they would be denied a relationship with either a mother or a father. To me, that's a much harder pill to swallow. That seems that you're using that child just as a tool of fulfilling adult desires, and you're not really doing what's in the best interest of that child, which is to have a mother and a father. So that's the concern there. Other questions? Yep.
With your presentation here, think about that nationwide strategy to catalyze awareness and move people office about how it's going. And
sure, yeah.
What your strategies are.
Yeah. So normally I speak to audiences that are, probably half the age of those gathered here. Normally I'm speaking on college campuses. It's college campuses and law schools where I do most of my speaking. This past academic year I was at Princeton and Yale and NYU and Stanford. I don't know, I was at 24 places. I can't remember the rest, but so some of the more secular elite places, trying to persuade students there that even if they disagree with me, to understand that they're people of goodwill on both sides of these questions. That I don't have to persuade them that I'm right, as much as it's important to persuade them that there's a debate worth having and that there are arguments on both sides of this issue. Because too often it's portrayed in the media, and it's portrayed by the Supreme Court even, in Justice Kennedy's opinion, that the only rationale for the Defense of Marriage Act was hatred of gays and lesbians, that it was animus, that it was bigotry, that it was irrational, phobias, things like that. So part of it is just pushing back to say, no, this is it's a difficult question. There are people of goodwill and sound mind on both sides of this question, and that we should have the debate. We should listen to people on both sides. Part of the reason that we wrote this book, my two co-authors and I, was precisely at having an argument that someone who doesn't agree with us can pick up and read and understand why we think what we think. Yeah.
That's the center where people are willing to hear and listen if they disagree. You've got the people that are throwing from power on the outside. The whole issue. This is just a platform of power.
Yep.
And again, just class means talking about it, and you see it in administration. Really, you see it on the Republican side, you see it on both sides. So when you're trying to reach college students, how do you bring that into the discussion?
Yeah.
And I think goodwill, instead of just subtle power play, that's a critical.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I think that the left has overplayed its hand. And you see this in what happened to the Duck Dynasty star Phil Robertson. Phil Robertson made some comments. Maybe they weren't phrased in the way that people in this room would phrase them, but the basic content was a biblical vision of sexuality. That's what he was trying to articulate. He even paraphrases St. Paul fairly accurately at one point in that interview. And then A&E suspends him from the show. And then Cracker Barrel takes Duck Dynasty products that featured Phil Robertson off of their shelves. And within days, both the network and Cracker Barrel had reversed their decision because they saw that it was costing them money. They saw that the American people weren't where the cultural elites were. So the business elites that run Cracker Barrel and that run A&E were out of touch with the ordinary Americans who eat at Cracker Barrel and who watch Duck Dynasty. That these ordinary Americans weren't going to tolerate what they were doing. Now, Cracker Barrel and A&E have the right to suspend Phil Robertson and to not sell his products. So no conservative was saying, oh, government should coerce them into doing this. But we have seen government coerce conservatives into celebrating same-sex relationships as if they're marriages. So we've had photographers and florists and bakers and innkeepers. More or less anyone whose professional life intersects with the wedding industry has come under fire if they've declined to use their talents to celebrate a same-sex wedding. The most well-known case is the case of Elaine Photography. She's an evangelical Christian who runs a photography business in New Mexico. And in 2006, it was a gay couple who asked her, will you be the wedding photographer for our commitment ceremony? And she said, I really can't do that. I believe marriage is the union of a man and a woman, and I don't think God would want me to use the talents he's given me, of artistic talents, to tell a story that I think is telling a lie about what he intends marriage to be. In 2008, the New Mexico Commission on Human Rights said that Elaine had violated the human rights of the gay couple, and they fined her almost $7,000. She then appealed this all the way up to the New Mexico State Supreme Court, which sided against her. And in one of the concurring opinions, one of the judges said that the price of citizenship is that Elaine has to compromise her religious beliefs and serve the same-sex couple. And when I got to that part of the decision. I was like, he must have this background. The price of citizenship should be that the same-sex couple just go to a different photographer. It's not as if conservative Christians have a monopoly on the photography business or the cake baking business or the floral business. And that part of freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of contract, and freedom of religion is that we can choose what sort of products we want to produce, what sort of wedding photos we want to take, what sort of story we want to tell. And that we don't have to be treated as if we're, mass production agents of just, we tell whatever story anyone wants us to do. And for her, it was the story about marriage. She had no problem taking pictures of gays and lesbians. The baker had no problem baking birthday cakes. The florist had no problem doing a get well soon bouquet of flowers. All three examples, the objection was to marriage. They didn't want to tell a lie about marriage. In all three of these instances, they've been sued by the government. They've been laws being used to coerce these people into violating their consciences. When ordinary Americans hear about this, they say that's a bridge too far. I thought this was a live and let live society, and the gay couple should be free to live and to love how they want to, but government shouldn't be coercing ordinary Americans into violating their consciences. So that's one way of, when you talk about the Machiavellian aspect and the power aspect of pointing out how the coercion works in this instance.
Coercion is the issue. That's a question. It's a strategy to try to get to act that way. Your presentation, I think, is that way. Is that how you're getting your generation on board and thinking that way?
Well, I mean, it's two things. One is it's to just go back to the question of what is marriage. When the other side says, oh, we're in favor of marriage equality, I say, so are we. We all want the government to treat all marriages equally. The only thing we disagree about is what is a marriage. Because any marriage policy will draw a line between relationships that are marital and relationships that aren't marital. And so the question is, where do you draw that line? And in order to draw that line correctly, you have to know what a marriage is. So marriage equality, putting up an equal sign on your Facebook profile, tells us nothing about what it is that you want to treat equally. So the title of the book that my co-authors and I did is What is Marriage? The subtitle, Man and Woman, a Defense. And it's just 100 pages of secular arguments, philosophy and social science, answering that question and explaining why it's so important that a man and a woman commit to each other permanently and exclusively. And why those four aspects, monogamy, exclusivity, permanency, and sexual complementarity, hang or fall together. That once you say the male-female aspect of marriage is irrational and arbitrary and bigoted, there's no reason left to say that marriage should be only between two people, that it should be a permanent relationship, and that it should be an exclusive relationship. And once you say the male-female aspect should go, what's magical about twosomes? The reason that we have marriage and monogamous relationship is that it's one man and one woman who can unite in the act that creates new life, and every new life has one mother and one father. And that begins to explain why that man and that woman should commit permanently and exclusively, so that any children that they produce have the access to the love, the care, the attention of that mother and father. But once you say marriage is just about adult romance can come in as many sizes and shapes as is imaginable. Twosomes, threesomes, foursomes. It can be temporary or it can be permanent. It can be open or it can be closed. And they've even created new words. The term wed lease is for a temporary marriage contract. It's a play on the word wedlock. Wedlock signifies something that's solid and sturdy. Wed lease, the exact opposite. The term throuple for a three-person couple. You chop off the C and you add a THR. It was 2 weeks ago, the New York Post had a headline that said, America's first throuple expecting their first baby. And it's three lesbians who are married to each other in the state of Massachusetts. Two of them have a legal marriage contract, and the third has a contractual relationship with the other two, so that the three are in a marriage-like bond, and one of them is expecting a baby through a sperm donor. And the question is, once you say that you are in favor of marriage equality for the same-sex couple, what about marriage equality for the same-sex throuple? And what is your reason for denying them marriage equality? So part of what I try to do when I do campus speaking is to help get people thinking about what marriage is. That it's not just about consenting adult romance. That it has a bigger meaning. That human sexuality is also generative. And creating the generations, what we owe to that next generation, what we owe to that child, is to provide it with the best chance possible of being in a relationship with the man and the woman, the mother and the father who helped create the child. And the way that we've done this historically in America is by having marriage. It's by defining marriage and encouraging men and women to get married and stay married. And that when this doesn't happen, the social costs, the social consequences run high. Yep.
Some people would say that a child better off with gay couples with parents who are loving rather than being with opposite sex parents who are constantly at each other's throat, just hate each other.
Sure.
Comment on that.
Yeah. So in some cases, we know that that's certainly true. We can know that in the abstract, there's no reason why a gay couple or a lesbian couple can't love a child. No one's denying that gays and lesbians can love a child. The question, though, is what sort of relationship is the ideal for a child? And so here, no one would suggest that a couple that's always bickering and at each other's throats is the ideal for the child either. So you just asked me to compare which one of these two non-ideal environments is less non-ideal. I think the question for marriage policy is really to hold up what the ideal is. And the ideal would be every child have a relationship with the mother and the father who created the child. And that for that we have tons of social science evidence that show that mothers and fathers parent in different ways, that men and women relate with children in distinct complementary ways. And you can just do silly thought experiments about which parent is more likely to wrestle in the living room carpet with a young boy. Which parent's more likely to be throwing a boy up in the air? I mean, typically these are things that fathers do. Which parent's more likely to scare away a bad boyfriend for his daughter? It's typically the father that does those things. Mothers do complementary things. Mothers tend to be the more nurturing, the more supportive, the more caring. Mothers are the ones that say, honey, don't throw him so high, when the father is tossing the baby in the air. And then we have, and there's a host of social science that shows that when you do grow up without the father or without the mother, that there's a trail of consequences. But we also know, even apart from the social science, that there's something about the biological connection with the two halves of humanity who gave you life. This is one reason why we don't just randomly assign babies to parents in the neonatal ward. Right? It matters to you which baby you take home after you go into labor. You want to take home your baby, and that child wants to have a relationship with its mother and its father, not just any old mother and father, but the mother and the father who helped create the child. That our biological identity matters as well. So that's the basic response. Yep.
I think of my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, and I'm thinking, what do they have to face? Have we been politically correct so long that there's nothing we can do now?
Well, there's always something we can do. I don't think it's ever a lost cause. Yeah. I mean, I think the first step is going to be to create a counterculture of our own. So if you think historically, in the 60s and the 70s, the counterculture were the hippies and was the progressives. That's now become the culture, right? The counterculture of the 60s and 70s now just is the culture, which gives an opportunity for conservatives to carve out a niche area for themselves, to carve out their own area to be the counterculture, and then to do a social experiment. And you can think about it this way. Right now we see people moving out of California and moving to Texas. There's a social experiment taking place with the red states and the blue states. And that a state like California, which high taxes, high regulation, doesn't work very well. A state like Texas, low taxes, low regulation, it's having economic growth, social mobility growth. It's a wonderful place. People are moving there because there's opportunity. People are fleeing California. The same thing can now happen with family types. If conservatives can create a counterculture in which men and women get married to each other, they have kids inside of marriage, they don't cheat on each other, they don't divorce each other, after a couple of generations, you'll see the results of this experiment. So one side of the aisle will say consenting adults should do whatever consenting adults want to, regardless of the size or the shape or the duration. You can have the wed lease, you can have the throuple, all the rest. The other side, no, we really want men and women committing to each other permanently and exclusively so that kids have moms and dads. See what the outcome is. There's no law that will prevent you or your children or your grandchildren from living out the truth about marriage in their own households. And so then it's just a matter of, if enough of us do this, the results will speak for themselves.
What if our schools, our churches, our workplaces, even some homes are totally against
Yeah.
being not acceptable of alternate lifestyles? Or, I mean, how can you tell your granddaughter that she's learning in school that you cannot be critical about someone and you can't judge them or whatever, and yet they know you live this particular life,
Yeah.
have these particular morals and so on?
Well, that's a great argument for school choice. That's a great argument for avoiding the government monopoly on public schools. There's no reason why a public school has to be government run. So it's a great argument for charter schools, it's a great argument for vouchers, it's a great argument for parochial schools, for homeschooling, for resisting the adoption of Common Core. I think those are the sorts of things that conservatives have to be thinking creatively about. Is children are formed inside of the home, but they're also formed at church and they're formed at school. And so what can we do to have education reform so that parents are put in control of what their children are learning? What can we do so that the citizens of Hawaii, that those parents are put in the driver's seat of what their children are learning at school and not some bureaucrat, whether it's in the state capitol or in the US Capitol, deciding what the curriculum is going to be. So I think that argument's a great argument for school choice. And then there's an argument for encouraging your pastor, your priest, your religious leader to be bold in teaching the truth about this. I think one problem that the American religious communities have had is that they didn't want to be controversial. So they didn't really talk much about this. And the other side talked about it nonstop. And that's one reason why some of the polling might not look like it's with us right now. But public opinion polls will shift, they'll ebb and flow based upon who's making arguments. And so if the church muzzles itself and is just silent on this issue for a generation, it's not surprising that a generation doesn't understand the truth about this. But that's no reason why your priest or your pastor or whoever your religious leader is can't start speaking out now. At the very least, the First Amendment will protect the freedom to worship. Even the Obama administration is willing to concede that. We should demand a more robust understanding, the original understanding of the First Amendment. But in the meantime, there's no reason why we can't be bold in speaking out the truth. We do have some preliminary social science on what it's like with growing up without a mom or a dad, and we can extrapolate some of that to say that it's not just about the number two, so that any two parents would matter, but that fathers and mothers actually do distinct things. And so if you have two fathers or two mothers, you're missing out on having the opposite, having a mother or having a father. But I think in general, it's still too soon to say, what the concrete outcomes would be for that child. But I think it's also important to say that the concern about marriage is broader than just the concern about same-sex parenting. The concern about the redefinition of marriage is about what vision of marriage is being enshrined in the law. And the vision of marriage that includes both same-sex couples and opposite-sex couples is a vision of marriage in which marriage is primarily about adult romance. And that understanding of marriage will be further internalized by all Americans if that's the vision that the law is promoting. A different vision is what used to be internalized by Americans. That vision of marriage was that marriage was about the love between spouses, but it was also about creating that next generation. And that could then begin to explain why it also demanded certain commitments, of a permanent commitment, an exclusive commitment, for better or for worse, in sicker or in health, till death do us part. I think with the wed lease and the throuple and things like that, it'll be harder to understand. I'm going to guess that probably means that I should stop because it looks like we're running out of time. But thank you guys for spending your afternoon with me. I appreciate it.